High atop a remote hill in Vietnam, United States Marines found themselves in a regular fight for survival. Hill 119 was seemingly cut off from the world, but the Marines who stood watch there survived together through duty, grit, and brotherhood. In this episode of Veterans AZ, we sit down with Mike Fallon and Jim Unsworth, both Arizona residents who spent time on that distant hill during the height of the Vietnam War. They share what that experience was like. Theirs is a story of war, resilience, and the lasting power of shared service. First of all, to get us started, I'd like to ask, and Jim, I'll start with you. Where did you grow up and what led you to join the Marine Corps?
I grew up in the state of Indiana. My uncle was a Marine at Guadalcanal in World War II. His son, my cousin, was a Cold War Marine, and he brought all these neat Leatherneck magazines home. And so I kind of got spoon-fed those, and my brother went in before I did, so it was kind of a family thing.
And I know that's a common experience for most people. Mike, how about you? Where'd you grow up and how'd you end up in the Marine Corps?
Similar family experience. My father was a career Marine, so born on Camp Pendleton, the old Naval Hospital, and grew up in the Marine Corps, and only thing I knew. I joined freshman year of college.
And so you both ended up in the recon Marines, correct?
Yeah.
And it's one of those units that's really considered among the elite of the United States Armed Forces. Was it a goal of yours to be part of that unit, or how'd you end up there?
It was sort of a goal, but myself and about 5 other lieutenants, we arrived in country. They took us up to the top of Hill 327, 1st Marine Division headquarters, set us on a bench, and they were going to divvy us up and give our assignments after a pep talk from the general. And one of the admin majors comes out and said, "Well, Recon just lost another lieutenant. Anybody want to go?" And I was the only one that raised my hand, so that's how I got there.
So congratulations, I guess. Mike, what about you? Was it something that you were focused on?
I was. I thought I was going to recon going in country because of the shortage of lieutenants. I ended up in an infantry unit. Best thing that ever happened to me was I got really well grounded in Vietnam, in what the enemy could do to us. And then after 6 months, I was transferred from the infantry unit over to the recon unit.
I want to go back to your arrival in Vietnam. You talked about how you raised your hand for the recon Marines, but do you remember any other or first impressions that you had when you got to Vietnam? What struck you most? The sights, the smells? Is there anything that sticks with you even today?
The smells, for sure, yeah. And the sights, it was just, we came over from Okinawa, so that's, it's not CONUS, but it was such a, big change. And everybody's walking around carrying a gun. Okay. And then you just, adapt and go with it.
Get your assignment and away you go. Then, Mike, what about you? Do you remember that first arrival in Vietnam and what that felt like?
We landed at Da Nang International in 1969 and 70, the busiest airfield in the world.
Yep.
When they opened the door, you got hit with a combination of Arizona heat, but East Coast, Florida humidity. Above 100, both categories, coupled with the diesel fuel of the air base. It's a smell you just take in and say, by the time you walk down the ramp and across the tarmac to the 6-bys, you're totally soaked in whatever uniform you're in. And you're replacing the same number of people. So if 300 came on your flight in that draft, there were 300 guys finishing the tour going the other way. And the new guys are looking at the old guys. The old guys got comments like FNG and you wish you hadn't come as they're going to their freedom bird. And they looked at it as their freedom bird.
And so it's fascinating to hear about that experience, and the fact that you both shared that. And another, of course, shared experience that you had revolves around Hill 119. I just wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about Hill 19, this hilltop observation post. Where was it? What was its purpose? What made it such a challenging place to defend or operate from?
It was about 28 miles south of Da Nang. It was physically located north of the Khoisan Mountains, which was the NVA's base area 116. What that means is they controlled the mountains, and the North Vietnamese Army measured everything by one-night hikes. So sometimes it was up and down, but they spaced everything by one-night hikes. The observation post goal was to impede their nightly walk in both directions, and they had traffic going in both directions.
So the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong, or some combination thereof, would obviously, they would target Da Nang as an important, really the important logistical hub of the United States operations in that part of Vietnam. And so this OP was positioned as part of our defense of Da Nang, really. But you said it was 28 miles south of Da Nang?
Correct. So the Marine Corps created what was called the Rocket Belt Trace. And there were infantry battalions that guarded the trace. They ended up plowing the trace with Roman plows, putting sensors in it. They also put observation posts around the trace, both inside it and outside it. They each manned a radio relay. So the radios only have line of sight capability. The Delta Company radio relay and observation post was Hill 119. It was the lowest hill. It had 4 hills with direct line of fire that were higher than it, right around it, but it had superior observation, great location if you want to see and feel and touch the enemy, not such a great location to defend.
But you're right, we were very exposed. And we were on at least 50% alert at night. And that's when we would see the infiltration route. They were coming south of the hill, coming out of the Khoisans. And we had the first generation of night vision lenses or goggles. It was, as big as an old computer terminal. But that's what we used. And but in the daytime, we would register pre-planned artillery strikes. We sighted in a couple of 50 caliber machine guns on trail junctions, so that when we had the activity, the targets were laid on, the weapons were laid on. We didn't have to go running down and, where do I go?
So you all knew the terrain, and you planned to cover that terrain.
Yeah.
From a weapons perspective. Mike, what about any specific incidents or memories you have during your time on the Hill?
Lots of memories, and lots of them have been reinforced doing research for the book. Jim said the ville below the hill, 1,000 meters, Thosan, sometimes was a target, sometimes it wasn't. We want our listeners and viewers to understand we Marines worked with rules of engagement. In the rules of engagement, you had to make a decision, you meaning the lieutenant, commander of the hill, on whether or not to engage what you observed down below. Was that rice farmer a farmer or a Viet Cong? Was he carrying a hoe or a rifle? You made these decisions daily. So there's a good discussion of the rules of engagement at the grassroots level as a theme through the book. Delta Company manned the hill 600 consecutive days. The hill was probed 65 times. It was ground attack full up twice. Most of the time they went around and they tried to pin the Marines in with booby traps.
So in between those times, you said you would rotate up to the hill for 2 weeks and then you'd be replaced by a different platoon. So during that 2-week period, what did life look like? What did it look like? And what was it like to be there for 2 weeks, essentially in enemy country?
The Marines, when they were in the rear, and the rear was Camp Reasoner, they were only there 2 days. First day, you take a shower, get rid of your uniform, which is way better than the grunts. They got showers, had a mess hall. Second day, you get ready for your next patrol. When you're on patrol, which is what you did full time, that's Jim and 5 of his Marines behind enemy lines by 30 or 40 kilometers. That's adrenaline from the minute you step off the helo for 6 days pumping. And because it's adrenaline and you're scared, you pay attention to tactics and what you're doing. The hill was both. When the Marines got up there, hey, there's no first sergeant. They're kicked back. If it's a sunny day, I'm getting on top of the bunker. I'm sunbathing. The lieutenant's got to worry about getting attacked that night because he knows this is a thorn in the side of the 2nd NVA Division who lived in that base area. So there is this leadership challenge. Mm-hmm. We go to our basic school at Quantico. They call it "What now, Lieutenant?" questions. How much of a hard are you on the hill versus making some points, but also letting your Marines' feet and hands dry out so they don't get jungle rot. Suntanning's a good thing to do to dry yourself out. So the hill was good news and bad news.
How would you describe the sort of, I guess I would call it the camaraderie or the brotherhood? I mean, especially in an environment like this where you're not in a large unit. You're part of a large unit, but certainly in the time on the hill, you're a smaller component. And could you just describe that for people who maybe don't have that sort of experience?
Gosh, it's kind of hard to describe it unless you've been through it, really. And I found this in police work also. There's people you trust with your life, and they trust you with theirs. And you know, that's a very simple thing, but it goes very deep. And it's like, well, I think Mike mentioned it or whatever, 50, 55 years later, you know, we'll still have reunions, we'll still get together.
Well, that's good. And Mike, maybe you can say a little bit more about any of the sort of this brotherhood that forms and how it's stayed with you throughout the years.
Well, I think it's trust. When you're in combat, in a firefight with a group of people, you ultimately trust them. And so when you get together, be it 5 years, 10 years, or 50 years, there's no getting to know you. Some people just walk up and start a conversation, mid-conversation that might have been started 25 years ago, or they might come up and say, "Did you remember?" So we'll ask if he remembers this story. Water on Hill 119 was an issue. And so when he first went up there, when the hill was first dug into the ground, for your 2 weeks, a Marine carried a 55-gallon metal can of water and all his canteens, and that was his water. He stepped off the helo for 2 weeks. The Marine Corps had in the system something called a water buffalo. That's an axle with 2 wheels that holds 450 gallons. Reconnaissance units don't rate water buffaloes. So Corporal McAfee one night went 4 miles from this Camp Reasoner over to Da Nang International and liberated an Air Force water buffalo and brought it back to the recon motor pool, but it was painted baby blue. They painted it green, and then the next morning put it in a sling load, and you can see a water buffalo coming up here. That's on the slung underneath a CH-53 helicopter to be where it's to be placed. The first water buffalo to come up to the hill, Jim put a smoke grenade where he wanted it put inside the wire, but as it got closer to the hill, they noticed this green water buffalo started to turn blue. And what happened was the paint hadn't totally dried and the helo's flying with the water buffalo. It's not an issue because once a month, every outpost that had a water buffalo got a logistics water buffalo replacement where the full one came in and the other one went somewhere else. And besides, no Air Force guy was going to come up to Hill 119 and challenge Jim for the water buffalo his corporal stole, but it was probably the single largest upgrade in quality of life for the Marines on the Hill.
Matter of fact, those inventive, ingenious, corporals and lance corporals, they even painted in gold on the water buffalo Marine Corps numbers, inventory numbers. So
you do what you got to do.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It became part of the family, the water buffalo family, I guess. You had a whole bunch of them parked in Da Nang, and you switch them out.
Mike, you've written a book about this experience, and we'll show the book on screen. Hill 119, Defending a Reconnaissance Marines OP Vietnam, 1969 to 70. What compelled you to put pen to paper, so to speak, and write this book?
When I retired the second time, I wanted to do something, and I started researching something I knew about, and nobody had written about a recon OP per se and done the statistical quantitative analysis. All the military has what's called command chronologies that by policy, each command from battalion or squadron or higher writes a monthly summary. Hey boss, this is what I did. Reconnaissance units had the additional requirement to write a detailed report after every patrol. So when I started interviewing veterans that had been in 1st Recon on Hill 119, there were some great stories like the wild boar or the water buffalo story. I interviewed more than 100 corpsmen and Marines, people like Jim. Interviewed Jim's brother, who was in the infantry, stationed 5 miles away from us, and realized I would go back to the command chronologies. There wouldn't be the detail. I get the right date. But if you go to the patrol reports, you can grab a report by a date, but then you got to read the whole report. And so I crosswalked the two, and a 2-year love affair. The history book came out of it. Casemate, which does historical books, was read it and picked it up and put it through their editorial process. Anybody that knows Fallon knows I can't read or write, and that the Casemate editors did a great job.
Let me just ask you, did you all ever cross paths in Vietnam, or were you in that area at different times?
Different times.
Different times, and yet how did you meet up?
Same bicycle, same hill, same unit.
My brother.
Okay, so your brother is the connection there.
Yeah, he is a former enlisted retired Marine captain outside of Camp Luzerne. And he's tied into a lot of retired Marine networks and things. And he mentioned that I was in 1st Recon at a time. Mike picked up on that thread. We connected. I found out he lives in Scottsdale. And, that's how we connected and got together.
Jim, let me ask you this. What message, I know you spent some time talking to younger people about your experience. So what message would you want younger generations to to take away from this conversation or from meeting someone like you?
Well, I think we've all got an obligation to serve our country. I'd like to take that away, but I was just thinking about this on the way over here. Yeah, one of my biggest disappointments is I can't be 23 again and go back, because I would go in a heartbeat.
And how long did you stay in the Marines?
I was in from 1965 to 1980. I had the 3 years of active duty, then reserves on either end.
And then I also understand after you got out of the Marines, you became a police officer.
Yeah, with Phoenix.
With the Phoenix Police Department.
Right.
And you did that for how long?
A total of 25 years.
So really an incredible legacy of serving your community, whether it's in the Marine Corps or as a police officer. It's that legacy of service that I think we just see among everybody who's worn the uniform. So, Mike, what about you? You've written this book. Obviously, you want people to read it. You've done an incredible service, I think, to your fellow Marines just to document this history, which just does not, there just aren't people out there able to do that for all of these different units that have had all of these unique and incredible experiences. So what's a message you would want someone to take away either from watching this or reading your book or just learning a little bit more about you and your experience?
Kelly, thank you for that question. And thanks for doing Veteran AZ. It's a great outreach to our community. It's really good. 3 objectives in the book. The first and the most important. So young soldiers, Marines, corpsmen, special ops guys can learn from our mistakes. The second thing would be just that we pay respect to the veterans that we left there, the POWs and MIAs that are not accounted for, that are still unaccounted for, and so we pay respect to them. The book is dedicated to PFC Haney. He's the one Marine that we lost in 600 days off of Hill 119 from Delta Company. And so it's dedicated specifically to him. And then the third thing is our uniformed services, especially the Marine Corps, as they grow, reevaluate themselves. And there's a tendency to think that technology can solve all your problems. So the message is, do not cut all your human assets. I just want to say personnel policy real quick. When Vietnam started, the American forces deployed as units. The units had trained together, they had camaraderie, they did great. DoD made a decision after the first year to go to individual replacements, which means when your 13 months were up for a Marine, a new guy would come. So that caused turbulence, and that causes you time to learn. And so on Hill 119, there were 24 commanders in 600 days, 2 weeks at a time. So Jim went up there 4 times, 2 months apart for 2 weeks. Their Viet Cong counterpart was a lady called the One-Armed Woman, and she was the village elder of Tho Son Village, the village that Jim mentioned. She knew the hill, both sides of it, all the trails. She was the commander of that area. She was there for 10 years. For our 600 days, she faced 24 of us trying to figure her out. My point about personnel policy is there was no spin up for her. Every time we changed, she could see the 2 helos come in, and that night, we've documented it, the unit would get probed in their line, see if they're awake, how good they are. There'd be new booby traps put out.
It sounds very similar, and perhaps you did carry some of those lessons to the folks fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan as well, because of course, for those, I did not serve there, but for those of us that observed, it seemed like a lot of what they did was work with the village elders and the civilians and in a very similar kind of atmosphere. Were there lessons that you think were transferred from an atmosphere like Hill 119 for the Marines to, say, Fallujah or somewhere like that?
Absolutely. All of the leaders in the Marine Corps and the Army talk culture first. We have a thing for Afghanistan and Iraq. You will drink tea with the elders. The one-armed woman was the elected village elder. So she had a South Vietnamese elected position. She was also the VCI, the Viet Cong infrastructure head person for that village. Her interest was her people. She wasn't a communist. She lived in that village. She fought the French and won. In Vietnam today, they teach the American War. They've just opened a brand new museum, Smithsonian level quality now, up in Hanoi. Dioramas, videos. Every station is dual language, Vietnamese, English. So all the tourists go there, but so do all the children.
And so I know it seems like among the Vietnam veterans that I speak to, many of them have gone back to Vietnam, and you're one of those.
I am.
Tell us a little bit about why and when and what that was like.
I've been back multiple times. Senator McCain, rest his soul, encouraged me to go back. It's a good closure for yourself. I've taken my wife back, taken one of my daughters. My two sons haven't made it yet. They keep working. It helps them get an idea. It lets you talk about it, and it's therapy for PTSD. And everybody that's been in a lot of combat, in my opinion, has PTSD. This is a way to deal with it. This book, huge way for me to, instead of thinking of bad things, I write them down in a book.
Well, certainly a incredible point in history, and I'm really appreciative of being able to talk to both of you today. We, in the city of Scottsdale, and I know other Valley cities, have been doing more and more to honor and recognize our Vietnam veterans. So very happy to speak with both of you today.
Well, great.
Kelly, thanks for having us on.
Yes, it was a good time.
I'm glad. Thank you.